Hello everyone, and let's talk about our next component. So far we have used example gen, statistics gen. So we are now going to talk about schema gen, which is under data validation. And schema gen is also very simple to use. So let's go to the documentation for schema gen. Um, It says some TFX components use a description of your input data called a schema. So the schema specifies the data types for the feature value. So whether your column is an integer or it's a float or it's a string, what are the ranges of values in your columns, um, whether that feature should be present or not. So that is your schema, right? So if we say schema, that is what it means. So you have an example of a schema here. So the file format is the dictionary-like file format we saw in TF examples and TF records. So here you have a feature called age, which has a minimum value of 1. This is probably just one example. And you have another, it's of a type float. You have a feature called capital gain, which also has a type float. So yeah, you see things like that when you look at the schema. So let's go ahead and then put this schema in our pipeline, right? So what we do is we say schema gen is equal to, first we have to import schema gen. So as the same, just like the other component, so we say TFX dot component import schema gen, and then we go on to say we use it here, so schema gen. So what do you think schema gen would take? So schema gen would take so it's a pipeline. So one component takes input from the previous components and then outputs something, some artifacts or some data, and then that will be consumed by the next component. So schema gen would take the output of the statistics gen component. So output, then we provide the key, which is statistics. And then we can say context run schema gen, and then context dot show schema gen dot outputs schema, and then we just run this. So yeah, this is our schema. This is a very small, I mean, it's not really small, but it just has two columns. So you would not really see so much information. If you, it's different from if you're working with a structured data, which we will look at in a later playlist. But for NLP, you just have probably the review and the rating. So you can see here that the review, it's of type bytes, and we require um, all the review. We don't want a case where we have null values, so the presence is required. The ratings of type int is also required, right? Now, valency and domain, well, if the ratings was, let's say, negative and positive, instead of 0 and 1, we put negative and positive there, then you might have your domain to be negative and positive. But because it's just an integer, you don't have anything for domain and valency or anything like that. So, just to show you something else. So Let's go back to the folder. Um, so let's go to our pipeline folder. So you can see that SchemaGen folder has also been created for us. And if I open, you can see the schema file, which is the. Now you can read this schema file directly if you have TensorFlow data validation. And I said in some other series I'll talk about how to use TensorFlow data validation, and we are just concentrating on the components. And if I go to my now, what makes TFX components good to use? The reason why I like using them because it creates separate folders for different runs, right? So this is our most current run. So you have a different folder to it. This is a run that we run on probably when I started a series. So for this one, you have another folder for that. And you can see it's the same for statistics gen also. You have different folders for separate runs. So all your runs are run independently. If you have a new run, you have another folder being created. So it makes it easy to track your data lineage, like what um, run is using which data and which runs are using which artifacts, things like that. So yeah, and you can also give certain names to your runs, but now we are just um, using just the numbers and stuff. So that is all for this video, and in our next video we will look at our next component. So keep watching.